I had just gotten back from the grocery store when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something inside told me to answer. A polite woman from the bank introduced herself, confirming my full name. When I said yes, she immediately asked if I was calling about the delinquency notice for the mortgage. Mortgage? I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't have a mortgage. My small house had been paid off years ago after my divorce. I asked her to repeat herself, and she politely but firmly said, "Yes, ma'am, you are listed as a co-signer on a $250,000 mortgage loan for a property in Bellevue Heights." I sat down heavily on the nearest chair, trying to catch my breath. "There must be a mistake," I said shakily. She gave me the loan number and suggested I visit the bank in person with identification to discuss it further. Still stunned, I called my parents. Maybe they would know something. They were always close with my younger brother, Ryan. He was the type who couldn't manage money if his life depended on it, but I never thought it would come to something like this. When I asked if they had heard anything about my name being attached to a mortgage, there was a pause. A long, guilty silence that made my stomach churn. Then my mother, Patricia, said softly, "Honey, you always wanted to help Ryan, right? We thought it would be fine." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They had added my name to his loan without my consent, forging my signature. The realization settled over me like a lead blanket. This wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. And as much as I loved my parents, I realized something very cold in that moment. They had chosen Ryan's future over my trust. I hung up the phone without another word. I knew I had to stay calm. Emotions would get me nowhere. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything I needed to find out. Tomorrow, I would go to the bank. Tomorrow, I would find out just how deep this betrayal ran. The next morning, I barely slept, replaying the conversation with my mother over and over in my mind. The sun rose, but there was no warmth in it. I dressed in silence, choosing plain, dark clothes. It felt appropriate, almost like I was preparing for a funeral. In a way, maybe I was. The funeral of my trust. When I arrived at the bank, I was greeted by a woman in her 40s named Mrs. Franklin, who quickly led me into a small glass-walled office. Her smile was professional but strained, like she already knew the kind of conversation we were about to have. She pulled out a thick file and pushed it toward me. "This is the documentation for the mortgage in question, Miss Carter." I flipped through the papers, my stomach twisting. There it was. My name, my forged signature, my social security number, attached to a property I had never even seen. My hands shook slightly as I turned the pages. Mrs. Franklin leaned in and said quietly, "I'm not supposed to say this, but you're not the first person I've seen in a situation like this. Family can do things we never expect when money is involved." Her words struck deeper than she probably intended. I kept reading. Apparently, the house was bought by Ryan 6 months ago, a 2-story in a gated community he had no business affording on his salary as a part-time mechanic. Payments had already been missed twice, and now foreclosure was looming. Mrs. Franklin explained my options. Because I was a co-signer, I was fully liable for the debt if Ryan defaulted. My credit, my savings, even my home could be at risk if the bank pursued collections. I thanked her, my mouth dry, and left with copies of the documents clutched in my hand. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, just breathing. I thought about my parents. They had always favored Ryan. When he failed out of college, they said he was finding himself. When he wrecked 2 cars, they said he was just unlucky. I had worked 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school, never asked them for a dime, and yet somehow I was still the one they thought they could use without even asking. The anger burned hot under my skin, but I forced myself to stay cold. Emotions wouldn't fix this. I needed a plan. First, I would visit the property. I needed to see what exactly I was being tied to. Then I would talk to a lawyer, quietly, calmly, no yelling, no scenes. They wanted to treat me like I was stupid? Fine. Let them believe it, for now. But the day would come when they would realize just how badly they had underestimated me. The next afternoon, I drove to Bellevue Heights. The community was as polished and pristine as a magazine ad. Freshly mowed lawns, Identical houses painted in soft, muted colors, and expensive SUVs in every driveway. It didn't take long to find the address. The house was larger than I expected. A wide, two-story colonial with a white porch, black shutters, and a bright red door. It looked brand new, almost sterile. But what caught my attention wasn't the house. It was the driveway. 2 trucks were parked there, both battered and covered in dirt, completely out of place in this manicured neighborhood. And the front yard was littered with crushed beer cans and a broken garden gnome. I parked a few houses down and watched. After about 10 minutes, the front door opened and Ryan stumbled out, shirtless, holding a beer. He looked rougher than I remembered, heavier, more careless, his once boyish face bloated and unshaven. He yelled something back inside and laughed, a hard, empty sound. Another man appeared, equally scruffy, dragging a portable speaker behind him, blasting music so loud it shook the windows. It didn't take a genius to see what was happening here. Ryan had turned this expensive property into a party house, probably renting out rooms to his deadbeat friends. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just immaturity. This was a ticking time bomb, and my name was attached to it. I didn't get out of the car. There was no point confronting him here. He wouldn't listen, and I didn't trust myself to stay calm face to face. Instead, I drove straight to a local law firm a few miles away. I had called ahead and secured a consultation with an attorney named Mr. Claiborne, a tall, reserved man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for handling messy family cases. He listened quietly as I laid out everything, showing him the bank documents. His brow furrowed deeper with every page he turned. "This is serious," he said finally, tapping the forged signature with his pen. "What your parents and brother did constitutes fraud. Forgery, identity theft, possibly conspiracy." The words sounded heavy in the small office. I asked him what my options were. He explained carefully. I could file a police report, pressing criminal charges against Ryan and possibly my parents. It would be messy, public, and could destroy whatever remained of the family ties. Or I could file a civil lawsuit, seeking damages and removal from the mortgage. Still difficult, but potentially less explosive. Or, he said, studying me carefully, you can leverage the situation privately. Use the threat of legal action to force them to correct this, while keeping the matter out of court. I nodded slowly. I needed to think. There were no good options, only different kinds of damage. Before leaving, Mr. Claiborne gave me advice I wasn't expecting. "People who betray you once," he said, "often betray you again. Plan accordingly." I drove home in silence, my mind racing. The stakes were higher than I had dared admit. And I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about dignity, about taking back the power they had stolen from me. That night, I barely slept again. The outlines of my options played over and over in my head. Pressing charges would publicly shame them, but it would also drag my name through the mud and possibly destroy what little relationship we had left. A lawsuit would be cleaner, but expensive, slow, and exhausting. And private negotiation? That would require something I wasn't sure I had left: trust. The next morning, I made a decision. I would confront them, but not all at once. Ryan first, alone. He was the weakest link. I drove to the house around noon, hoping to catch him sober. I parked in the street and walked up to the door. My heart hammered as I knocked sharply. After a long minute, the door creaked open. Ryan stared at me, blinking blearily. His once bright green eyes were bloodshot. He smelled like stale beer and sweat. "Hey, sis," he said, forcing a lazy grin. "Didn't expect you." I pushed past him into the messy living room. Empty pizza boxes, dirty laundry, and crushed cans littered every surface. I didn't sit down. "I know about the mortgage," I said flatly. He tried to play dumb. "What mortgage?" I pulled the papers from my bag and thrust them at him. "Don't insult me." Ryan's smile faltered. He scratched the back of his neck, looking around as if hoping someone would rescue him. "Look, it's not a big deal," he mumbled. "Mom and Dad said you wouldn't mind. You're doing fine. It's just temporary." Temporary. As if $250,000 was pocket change. As if risking my future was some minor inconvenience. You forged my name, I said, keeping my voice even. You committed fraud. Ryan flushed, then shrugged with maddening casualness. It's family, right? Family helps each other. I stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as my baby brother, not as the boy I used to defend in schoolyard fights, but as a selfish, reckless man who thought the world owed him everything. I'm giving you and Mom and Dad one chance, I said coldly. Fix this. Remove my name. Refinance the mortgage under your own name. Otherwise, I go to the police. Ryan paled, the reality finally sinking in. You wouldn't do that, he said, but there was a tremor in his voice now. I said nothing, just stared, let him sit in his fear. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. You have 2 weeks, then I do whatever I have to do. I didn't wait for a response. Driving away, I felt a surge of bitter satisfaction. It was a small victory, but it was mine. Now came the hard part, dealing with my parents. And I knew, deep down, they would not go down quietly. 2 days later, I stood on my parents' front porch, staring at the worn welcome mat that suddenly felt like a mockery. I used to feel at home here. Now, every inch of this place reminded me of how naive I'd been. I knocked sharply. After a moment, my father opened the door. Well, look who decided to visit, he said, forcing a smile. His gray hair was neatly combed, his plaid shirt ironed, as if keeping up appearances could erase the damage he'd done. My mother appeared behind him, wringing her hands nervously. Come in, sweetheart, she said. I stepped inside, the air thick with tension. We sat in the living room. I stayed on the edge of the couch, not wanting to sink into the cushions like I used to when I felt safe here. I laid the bank documents on the coffee table without a word. Their eyes darted to them and then away, guilt flickering across their faces. I know everything, I said, voice steady. The forged signature, the loan, Ryan's mess. My father cleared his throat. It was meant to be temporary. Ryan just needed help getting approved. We were going to take care of it. I stared at him. When? After the foreclosure? After they came after my house? My credit? My mother blinked rapidly, as if trying to summon tears. We didn't think it would get this far. We thought he'd find a better job by now. I almost laughed. It was always about Ryan, his bad luck, his endless second chances. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the silent, dependable one. You didn't think, I said coldly. You decided. You chose. Without me. They tried pleading, tried shifting blame, said things like, we did it for family, and you're stronger than he is. You can handle it. It was almost funny how quickly love turned into entitlement. I pulled a printed letter from my bag, a formal notice, drafted by Mr. Claiborne, outlining the fraud and demanding my removal from the mortgage within 14 days. I'm giving you the same chance I gave Ryan, I said, placing it beside the bank papers. Fix it, refinance, remove me, or I go to the police. Their faces went pale. My mother opened her mouth, but I cut her off. No more excuses, no more lies. I stood up. You taught me to do the right thing, I said. Now it's your turn. As I walked out, I heard my mother sob. My father cursed under his breath, but I didn't look back. In the car, I allowed myself one deep, shuddering breath. It hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But I knew this was the only way forward. 2 weeks. That was their window. And if they thought I would fold out of guilt or sentiment, they hadn't been paying attention to the daughter they raised. The first week passed in silence. No calls, no messages, no updates. I spent the time methodically. I met with Mr. Claiborne again, making sure every piece of evidence, the bank documents, my communications with the bank, copies of my demands, was organized and ready in case I needed to escalate. I also met with a financial advisor to safeguard my accounts, just in case my family tried anything desperate, like opening new credit lines under my name. Every night, the anxiety roared back. What if they ignored me? What if they tried to drag me down with them? I forced myself to stay logical. Fear wouldn't save me. Only preparation would. On the 8th day, I got a text from my mother. Can we please talk? We can explain everything. I didn't respond. On the 9th day, Ryan called, twice. I let it go to voicemail. His message was half apology, half pleading, full of empty promises. I could feel them squirming, trying to wriggle free of responsibility. But I knew better now. Guilt was their weapon. Silence would be mine. On the 10th day, I decided to drive by the Bellevue Heights house again, just to see. What I found made my stomach sink. The house was a disaster. Overgrown lawn. Trash scattered across the yard. A giant final notice sticker slapped on the front door. And Ryan's truck, gone. I parked a few houses away and asked a neighbor who was watering his garden if Ryan still lived there. The man frowned. "He moved out a few days ago," he said. "Some eviction papers showed up. Guess he couldn't pay." I thanked him and sat back in my car, stunned. Ryan had abandoned the house, probably thinking he could just walk away, leaving me stuck with the consequences. I texted Mr. Claiborne immediately. Within the hour, he called me back, his voice tight. "They're trying to force a foreclosure," he said. "If they succeed before we act, you'll be on the hook for the full deficiency balance." The walls were closing in. By the 11th day, it was clear. My family wasn't planning to fix anything. They were hoping to run out the clock, leaving me to clean up their disaster. They thought I would fold. They thought wrong. On the 12th day, I instructed Mr. Claiborne to begin preparing the lawsuit. If they wouldn't remove me voluntarily, then I would rip myself out, even if it meant tearing the family apart completely. By the 13th day, the lawsuit papers were ready. Mr. Claiborne had drafted a detailed complaint outlining the fraud, identity theft, and damages I suffered, and could suffer in the future if foreclosure went through. He even included a request for punitive damages, citing the deliberate betrayal by family members. We sat together in his office, going over every page. "Once you file," he said, "there's no going back. They'll be served officially. It'll be real in a way it hasn't been before." I nodded, the weight of it settling deep into my bones. I wasn't naive. Filing meant blowing up whatever fragile remains of our relationship existed. It meant public records, embarrassment, anger, maybe even revenge from them. But they had left me no other choice. I signed. The next morning, the papers were officially filed. Ryan, my mother, and my father would each receive a personal summons within the week. That same afternoon, the first counterattack came. I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my father. "You ungrateful little brat," he snarled before I could say a word. "After everything we've done for you, you throw your own family under the bus?" There was no remorse in his voice, only fury that I hadn't played the role they assigned to me, the silent supporter, the scapegoat. "You did this," I said calmly. "You and Mom, Ryan, you left me no choice. You always thought you were better than us," he spat, "always too good to help family." I hung up without another word. It hurt, deeper than I expected. For a few minutes, I sat at my kitchen table, just breathing, letting the wave of sadness wash over me without pulling me under. Then I picked up my pen and wrote everything down, the date, the time, exactly what he said. More documentation. Later that night, I got a text from Ryan. "You're ruining everything. Hope you're happy." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Just blame, like always. I didn't answer. By the 14th day, the foreclosure notice on Ryan's house had moved forward. I alerted Mr. Claiborne, and we began urgent steps to petition the court to separate me from liability before the bank could move against me directly. It would be a race against time, one I was determined to win, no matter how ugly it got from here. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. I sat outside the hearing room next to Mr. Claiborne, clutching a folder of documents. We had filed an emergency motion to sever my financial responsibility from the mortgage based on the fraud committed against me. It wasn't guaranteed. Judges were cautious, and timing was everything. When the clerk finally called my case, I stood up on shaky legs but forced myself to walk steadily inside. The hearing was quick but tense. Ryan hadn't bothered to show. My parents came, sitting stiffly on the opposite side, their faces hard and unrecognizable to me now. Mr. Claiborne laid out the facts. The forged signature, The fraudulent addition of my name, the abandonment of the property, the impending foreclosure. My mother cried. My father muttered bitterly under his breath. But they had no evidence to refute what was happening. After reviewing the documents, the judge finally leaned back in his chair and spoke. In light of the evidence presented, he said, the petitioner's liability shall be suspended pending final adjudication. If the foreclosure proceeds, the petitioner will not be personally responsible for any deficiency balance. I almost sagged in relief. It wasn't the end. There was still the broader civil suit for damages, and they could still fight back. But for now, the worst danger, the immediate threat to my credit, my savings, my home, had been neutralized. Outside the courtroom, I caught my mother's eye. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I turned away before she could. I didn't trust anything that came from them anymore. Not their words, not their tears. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I allowed myself a small victory. It had cost me, in ways I hadn't even fully realized yet, but I had protected myself when no one else would. Still, the lawsuit wasn't over. Ryan, in particular, was dragging his heels. He had missed deadlines to respond to the court filings, probably thinking he could ignore it until it went away. He didn't realize yet that he was only digging his own grave deeper. Mr. Claiborne and I discussed the next steps. If Ryan continued to ignore the proceedings, we could file for a default judgment, meaning I could win the case automatically. It would take patience, precision, strength. But I wasn't the same woman who had picked up the phone 3 weeks ago, confused and trusting. I was someone new now, someone dangerous, if pushed too far. And they had pushed me. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I received a call from Mr. Claiborne. Good news, he said. Ryan failed to file any response to the lawsuit. We're moving for a default judgment. I closed my eyes and let the relief wash over me. Ryan's negligence had sealed his own fate. The paperwork moved quickly. Without a response, the court accepted my claims as uncontested. By the end of the week, I had an official court judgment in my favor. Ryan was liable for the full damages, plus legal fees, plus a permanent injunction preventing him from attaching my name to any future debts. It didn't erase what happened, but it was a clear public acknowledgement that I had been wronged. My parents' side of the case was more complicated. They had hired a lawyer, a cheap, aggressive man who filed a weak defense, claiming it was a family misunderstanding rather than fraud. But facts were facts, and signatures didn't forge themselves. Mr. Claiborne, calm as ever, demolished their arguments with documentation, emails, timelines, statements from the bank manager about the unusual way my paperwork had been submitted. The judge wasn't impressed with their excuses. He ordered them to mediation, hoping to avoid a full trial. But if they refused to settle, they would face everything in court. When I got the news, part of me wanted to cry. Not out of sadness, but exhaustion. Betrayal burned hot at first, but what lingered afterward was cold, heavy, unrelenting. I didn't even recognize my parents anymore. They called once after the mediation notice was sent. My mother's voice cracked with desperation. "Can't we just move past this?" she begged. "We're still family." Family. The word felt empty. I said, "Family doesn't steal from each other," and hung up. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't vindictive, but I was done being their safety net, their silent victim. At mediation, they offered a settlement, a token apology and a few $1,000s, hoping I would drop the suit quietly. I refused. Mr. Claiborne countered with a full financial settlement covering all potential losses, legal fees, and an agreement that they would never interfere with my finances again. They balked, postured, threatened. And then, faced with no choice, they folded. We signed the agreement under court supervision. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't clean, but it was done. I left the courthouse feeling lighter, even as the finality of it all pressed hard against my chest. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. In the weeks after the settlement, I moved through my life like someone waking up from a long, heavy sleep. The foreclosure on Ryan's house finalized without touching me. My credit report stayed intact. My savings remained safe. The lawsuits were officially closed. I was free. On paper, it looked like a victory. And maybe it was. But victories like this don't come with parades or celebrations. They come with silence, with grief. I took small, deliberate steps to protect myself going forward. I froze my credit. I changed banks. I set up identity theft monitoring. I reviewed every account, every document, every possible loophole that could be used against me. I wasn't paranoid, just awake now. I didn't hear from Ryan again. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, he had moved in with a friend 2 towns over, still blaming everyone but himself for what happened. My parents sent a few letters, apologies mixed with excuses, offers to talk it through, promises that they meant well. I read them once and filed them away without answering. Forgiveness, I realized, is not the same as permission to re-enter someone's life. Some nights, when the house was quiet and the world slowed down, the old ache returned. The longing for the parents I thought I had, the brother I thought would grow up and stand beside me. But mourning illusions isn't the same as mourning real people. The people, they were the people who betrayed me. I didn't owe them anything. One evening, I sat on the back porch, sipping tea, feeling the first hints of fall in the air. The trees swayed gently, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had survived. I had fought back when it would have been easier to stay silent. I had chosen myself. Maybe the price had been high. Maybe parts of me still ached from the break. But what I gained was something no one could forge or steal: self-respect. I glanced at my phone resting beside me. No angry texts, no missed calls, just quiet. And I realized I didn't miss the noise. I wasn't the daughter who would quietly clean up everyone's messes anymore. I wasn't the sister who would be used and discarded. I was my own person now, and whatever came next, it would be on my terms.